I'm very proud that we have a podcast with Michael Heynen. We are the Ideal Spaces Working Group, a charitable foundation concerned with space and community, and we make the podcast together with Grant Rainham and with Michael Heynen.
Thank you very much for being here.
Michael, you should just give us 2 or 3 minutes about yourself so everybody in the audience knows who you are.
Thank you very much. I am, out of my studies, I came from international relations and international law, philosophy, and started over then in a self-employed way for 30 years. Inter alia also 10 years in Brussels as a political advisor. And at least in the last years, I concluded my whole work and findings and my processes and also political engagements to think about and to organize it, the intersection of humanities and diplomacy. It has different detailed parts like governance procedures and also some deepening about governing, and especially in the last years thinking about societal, intersocietal processes driven by organizations like yours, for example, and finding out how to analyze, how to research, how to strategize the actual processes in the world, in Europe, and wherever it's asked for.
As regards these general processes, how you would describe the existing status quo of our present developments in societies in general and in particular of neoliberalism and democracy? There's much discussion about neoliberalism and democracy, and if you could give us, based on your experiences, if you could give us a short sketch, a picture of how you conceive the existing situation.
It's a very good question, very complex question, or opening up to a complex answer. But I would like to keep it simple, and please go ahead to deepen if you want to know more about one other detail. In my observation, and please let us be very clear about, we have a kind of Eurocentric perspective on this stuff. We are talking about the world on one hand, on the other hand we have a Eurocentric perspective, and I would like to distinguish that in the first step. The second is, your question is very complex because it opens up to other questions, and I would like to present you 2-3 theses just to open up to our talk. The one thing is, that's not only experience, but even out of my experience I had, of course, my kind of realizations, reflections, contemplations, what's going on, what is kind of going on in the wrong direction, or what I think can be a wrong direction, or what can be optimized. And my observation is that we now, since 40, 50 years, roundabout is a question of definition, reached the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene means that the mankind dominates 67% of the and geosphere, and means whatever interaction based on the human interaction is being driven. It's dominated by any interaction of human beings, of knowledge, of knowing, whatever, influenced by human beings. At the same time, we can observe, I said in quotation marks because we is a very problematic term, as you know, we as a mankind start to wonder about processes. We are getting irritated. There are aberrative processes. There are processes even in international relations, in the intersocietal level, interstates level, whatever, to how to explain it, how to explain cause and effect, how to explain even out of the whole stuff the presence to react on, or even how to build on that any further action which is hopefully out of freedom and out of peace. And this is very, very hard anyhow, because it might also be grand, or your Mr. Gehmann's experience in little talk rounds or little groups. The people say, "Oh, it's so much change in the world. I don't know, where does it come from?" It's my observation. Maybe you have the same experience. And my observation is that there is a kind of, let me say it just roughly in one word. There is this, in principle, it looks like a disconnection. What kind of disconnection? I think there is a disconnection between an outer and inner world. As we remember to Platon, or the Neoplatonist Augustine especially, he introduced to a so-called inner world and outer world. And we are anyhow very proud, having had so much inventions, being able to govern the world, the technical world, the mechanisms of this world and the natural world. Now 67%, like I told about the Anthropocene. The formation is just influenced by human being, as I told, that we are so proud about and so capable that we anyhow forgot that there is an inner space, an inner volume, an inner content driven by soul, by spirit. And this kind of missing, I think it's to observe. And now there is a question, if I take your question and come back to your question, that is in general, I think, a kind of meta-crisis. It's not the crisis of little subsystems like in the financial field, like in the political field, like in the Ukrainian war, and like in the Israeli conflicts, whatever. There are conflicts, of course, but even conflicts normally you can solve constructively. How to do that? The question is, do we always need to react on the violent level, on a level of military forces? Do we need a weaponization of the world? Do we need a militarization? Do we need just a physical reaction? Do we need in international relations just one paradigm? It's called the so-called geopolitics. Is it just enough? We lost, I think, the inner connection to our inner reality, and just being concentrated and focused out of on an outer reality, on an outer space, so to say. And this, I think, has then, of course, an influence on our movement, even on the political level, as you mentioned, democracy. Democracy, very clearly, as a thesis, democracy is, and let's take Immanuel Kant, and let's remember to his thesis, because we have all these general political philosophies, we have all that, and all the trying of states to govern about, to implement this kind of philosophies, shows that we anyhow are used up and used to have all these philosophies or mixtures of that, but on the other hand we didn't follow up in a sense of keeping our inner control out of our inner worlds, so to say. Democracy is, again, Immanuel Kant, is driven by mainly and ideally by the autonomy of subject. And here you can observe a very interesting thing. We anyhow stick in the total dominance of object. We lost ourselves to stay at the subject. If you don't stay to be a subject and just to being driven by the object, even out of egomanic projection, then you lose your control, you lose your inner connection with that what's going on. And this is very important for democracy, to exchange, peacefully to exchange, to, as an individual, to bring yourself in the process of dialogue, of discourse, and to find the best way, whatever can be handled or should be handled, and even with the right competency. This is very important, I think. And so far, if the autonomy of subject, like we had it on an ideal level from Kant and also the Schiller writings and poems, if we all take all that, we start to lose our connection to the principles. And one principle is the autonomy of subject, I think, and it's connected with freedom. And if the freedom is just an outer freedom, then it's a problem for democracy because we have an outer space, but not anymore any guidance out of inner freedom.
It's a very good point. To pose a question directly relating to that, the outer freedom. The interesting point in my eyes, at least, is that we have in the modern societies an overemphasizing of the world of objects, brought about by the triumph of the exact sciences. We have a long tradition, combined with technological progresses leading inter alia to a market economy of mass production. And as a result, we have an increased individualism on the one hand, but this is an individualism without any real individuum, without any real subject. And this individuum is devoted to the world of objects. So if I understood you properly, if we see this as a background, what you would say to sharpen your point with the subject and with democracy, this is a very, very important argument in my eyes, this connection. What is the major crisis today as regards subjects, to be true subjects, and their relation to democracy? Because in formal terms, we have democratic procedures, democratic organization, parliamentary democracy, and so on and so on. What is the crisis relating to the subject, the pseudo-individuum, the pseudo-liberated individuum of modernity and today, and democracy?
It's a very important question, I think. There's a key question. I think if you take the human being, and following me as far as I would distinguish between spirit, soul, and body. And if you then go in outer reality, only the body can be connected with. And the body level is the ego level, so to say. Very briefly now to distinguish this kind of differentiation, if you anyhow don't care for the self being incorporated in a spirit, and individually, of course, individual spirit and individual soul, then you leave your inner space which includes transcendence. I don't speak about any contemplative religious concepts. I really talk about also the reason. I'm talking about rational processes. You are not any more guided by your inside. And this being guided by outside, being totally merged with the object, leaves the subject itself empty or lost in space, like I would call it. For democracy, you can have, of course, formally a very nice democracy, very nice workout, very nice functions, Look at our so-called, I don't like this idiom, but let's call it the West and the rest. If you take now the Western countries, United States, the European countries, the EU, it's formally nicely working. But where is the human soul? Where is the human spirit? The individual human spirit. The individual then, if it's only connected and merged by the outside world and the reality, the so-called reality, it's only ego. And then, of course, it falls down in the typical primary level instruments or movements or even group dynamics or non-group dynamics, whatever you have at this point. You don't have any more interlude, interplay, interlock between the inside and the outside. And that way you have no more orientation. You can have nice programs, but for example, if you try to govern the world out of keeping in measures like a quantity measure like CO2 driven, which is in itself as a subject very important on the one hand. I'm not about discussing and critiquing about the reality, But if you govern only that kind of measure, so to say, then you don't need to care about democracy, because it's totally independent of not only opinion building or decision building. No, it's independent of any inner spiritual position. And this kind of loss, this kind of distinction and disconnection, this is to watch, I think, in order. Why is it so important? Because we also had in our pre-talk, we anyhow triggered this point. We are now, of course, in a transition, because we all realize it's going on. Not what's going on, but there's something going on, and therefore I again said, maybe back on your question even, there is a meta crisis, and the problem of that meta crisis is it's not visible. It's totally invisible, because our loss of spiritual and soulful processes from inside to outside, and to match it and to match with the outside. Of course, outside you can learn very much, you can have very much knowledge about the outside and reality world. On the other hand, what are you doing with? And this is my concern, let me say it like that. How do we create a transition? A transition is a very interesting process, but anyhow, at the end of the day, of this single day where you realize it's a transition, you need to answer the question, what is the direction? This direction is a transformative process.
This is a very good point. Let me begin. If you see this process very, very simplified as a move from one point A to one point B, the point A is now. And you mentioned the meta crisis. The question is this meta crisis a crisis of meaning?
I'm not talking about any meaning. I'm not talking about any philosophy. It's how we treat it. You know, I come from a point, I'm not pessimistic, I'm not optimistic, I'm not whatever, I'm just analytical on a method kind of level. What is our method to treat that what we already reached? Mm-hmm. Because we today can lean back and saying we have everything. We have every kind of knowledge, every kind of philosophy, anyhow of technical, cultural inventions. We have very nice world on the one hand. On the other hand, what is missing? I think in my thesis is we lost the connection even to that. We lost the connection. For example, take Plato. Plato is a rich, full world. In the Greek world, already not only the mathematical and the astrological part, but even astronomy part, it's a very rich world. We have all that, but how do we treat it? How do we treat ourselves? And there I think we should look for the, let me say it like that, for the Copernic point, you know, to change, and the change to go in transition, and a very conscious, to drive on a very conscious process to get back to our inside. Mm-hmm. Because inside is unlimited. Reality is always, in principle, limited. Even if you take our whole planet, seeing it from the moon or wherever from outside, it's totally big on the one hand, and but at least it's a reality. In reality, in principle, it's always limited. In ourselves, we are, in our individual self, we are unlimited. We can imagine, we can visualize, we can invent visions, whatever. Maybe it sounds stupid, maybe it sounds spinning, but on the other hand, that is the creative world. Inside we can contemplate first, we can meditate, but especially we can reflect. And after our also rational reflection, we can come back to contemplation. That is the process. And this Copernic change we, I think, need now in order not to go think bad about our reality. No, we don't need. We are very rich, you know. And I don't forget, of course, the poorness of other areas in the world, of course. But in principle, mankind is very rich, but doesn't have any consciousness about it anymore. because consciousness is connected with the inner individual self and especially with the inner freedom to reflect it.
In regards to transformation, as you were discussing, in the arena of neoliberalism that we have today in Western Europe, Americas probably, in your point of view, from the picture you're painting, how does it look today? What are the major elements in your mind that exist relative to neoliberalism in the European continent and America in the 2020s, 2030s?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. My opinion or my position about every kind of political philosophy is whatever you develop, it's interesting to be taken in, to be reflected, and especially the liberalism. Let me call it not necessarily neoliberalism, you can call it like that, but at least the liberalism, because that's a core value of understanding. It's interesting on the one hand. On the other hand, the liberalism till now, and I now go back 250 years to our freedom fighters, so to say, especially United States, the Freemasons and all this. But as far as I can be right, or can see it in the right way, they didn't keep in their own rules. And whatever kind of political philosophy you develop, it's a problem if you don't keep in your own rules. For example, if I go for neoliberalism and developing a foreign policy and trying to export democracy, democracy is depending on the inner subject, on the inner individual freedom to realize, to reflect, to decide. You cannot push it in the people. You cannot force them. As we, for example, in Germany, in these days have a kind of democracy promotion. It's very nice. I'm not against it, but you cannot promote for something which is an inner process. Therefore, I think it's very important to start our inner process to open up, to love the reality on the one hand, on the other hand, to be critical about. Because only out of our insight we can have the potentials and the creative analysis to get an inner relation to. And the neoliberalism is one of the most important political philosophies, definitely, and therefore I thank you for your question. On the one hand, on the other hand, it also means to keep in its own rules.
And what are the own rules?
Ask a neoliberalist. You ask me.
In your perception.
My perception is very clear, and of course you're right to ask that. It's about freedom, of course.
Mm-hmm.
The human being is an individual, and whatever concept you develop in the world, and whatever kind of culture, I think, and we might deepen that in the next step, the future is, and developing any vision about the future is depending on what is the most important power in the world. Now we live in the Anthropocene on the one hand, on the other hand it's just governing the reality, the outside world. But is that humane? Do we want to reach a humane kind of future? This is the question which is in my core care, so to say, in order to go further. And I can only ask for come back to the inner freedom instead of one political concept and then a neo-concept and whatever. I call it the neo-freedom, so to say, because freedom is an individual capacity to be reached, to be developed, to be consciously cared for. This is most important, whatever concepts we have. I'm also critical about the huge quantity of state capacities. Does it make the world better anyhow? The big states, Do we need more regional capacity to reconnect with the societies? That's also a very, very important point,
Yeah, that's a good point.
And
practically, this is a good point. We can, if you like, we can deepen this this decentralization aspect. Let me call it in its total move a decentralization. So we had it very short in our last workshop this year at Idle Spaces. It was about dialogue and democracy, and then we had the idea, the concept, also the ideal of a new polis like neo-freedom, Neopolis, where this decentralization aspect has been discussed. The central question was in this discussion, is it possible to develop, in your terms, this inner freedom needed to be a real subject, to be ready for a real democracy deserving the name? Is this possible in large organizational frames we call states, or is this a contradiction in itself, the state and inner freedom? Do we need, therefore, this was our discussion, do we need therefore a new move towards decentralization?
The same.
It was a question.
The same point is, for example, we have very, very much regulation, states-driven regulation. But do we have normativity? This is the point. Where does normativity come from? It comes from the individually driven intellect and spirit and soul. And then you can convince. The state one time can only force it. And therefore in international relations or international arena, so to say, and I think globally, but I'm more talking about the West especially, the West anyhow flunked it because it didn't keep its own rules about freedom and understanding. It dissociated. It was just driven by the object realities and norms instead of inner normativity. Therefore, the neoliberalism, also liberalism and neoliberalism were developed. That was the reason. I just want to remember our freedom fighters, our ancestors, even in that area, in this region here, fighting for freedom. They had a kind of inner space of freedom and wanted to expand it in the outer space in order to implement their inner pictures, their inner visions, in order to go, in order to organize a society, and organize, then the society gives itself the state. In breaks today, the society is just there in order to save the state. That cannot be the point. It's just vice versa. What is important today, out of being so much dominated by the Anthropocenic kind of self-treatment of human being, we lost the inner space, the inner freedom. That's my thesis. It's very rough thesis, of course. It's maybe here and there not quite just, I know. But this is the problem. They came from the inner space in order to have an outer space. The state was there in order to watch about how to organize the outer space. That's a state's function, nothing else. But now we have to come back after having now governed the outer space, now we have lost or neglected the inner space. And now I think it's my appel, so to say, to come back to inner freedom, to come back to inner determination. We need determination. All the outside organization is just organizing the conditions. But we don't have any determination anymore.
This is a very good point. As every organization, as every formal organization, it can organize only the conditions. But the determination, as you said, it is driven by an inner self, is driven by convictions coming out of that inner self. And these convictions, in the positive sense of conviction, and these convictions are capable of convincing other people.
Exactly.
Huh?
Yeah, but I think at the same time, we're in a system. We all live in a system, and therefore the system has crises. And basically, to overcome a crisis, if we are really in a crisis, as many people think today, what would be your recommendations, for instance, to inspire a better future, a better development for the future, for the youth, for tomorrow?
It's a very interesting and opening up question to something else what I would like to mention. What is the method? How can we take ourselves to save our qualities, our humane qualities and humane core qualities especially? I called it a meta-crisis. It's not visible. First, to try to make that kind of crisis, meta-crisis, visible. That is one reason, because I'm very thankful for our discussion, to help to make it visible, to visualize also the other horizons, not only these flat horizons like on a disk, the variations of the same theme all the time, also political philosophies, also the reality just dominating and it looking like always. No, what is a real substance we need to develop again to have a humane transition and a transformation process which creates a humane future. For that, I think the crisis is first to be visible. I have only a crisis if I can see it. That's a horrible point because it's very background driven, but if I ignore a crisis, I don't have it. The second is, if I see the crisis, then to analyze. I try to give some points about this kind of to visualize that, but on the other hand, it can also be have other points I'm open to hear about. What I see is the first step we should do is just for a moment to contemplate on our reality, on our coming in a quiet, in an inner quiet. Mm-hmm. We are not so bad, like it might sound now. Yeah, we are not so bad, and even as a mankind, we have a great invention and all this stuff. But what do we want with that? I would like to add also up in this like a beside remark, just to have a transhuman or a transhumanistic kind of flee in what kind of ever projections is no help, because transhumanism is just the algorithmic quantity of expanding reality.
It is object-driven. The entire philosophy, transhumanism is purely object-driven.
It's just to put an algorithm on the reality, and you have another kind of.
So, do we need emancipation? I mean, what is the direction we need for this emancipation?
Grant, I think it's first just to be, for a moment, for a very decisive moment, just to come to quiet. Not to run around and just to be outsidely driven in stress and whatever. Just a moment in quiet and asking, who are we? Who am I myself?
Good point. The question is, let me play a kind of advocatus diaboli. Yeah? So I'm the devil here. No? And the devil asks, look, we are living in a world free of real inner self-awareness. We are living in a world consume-driven. The neoliberalism, the positive political and philosophical neoliberalism of our forefathers has been turned into a consume-oriented world full of objects. And full of small egos consuming these objects and having no time, out of what reasons ever, and they feel and think they have no time. How to install quietness here, and how to come back to Grant's point, how to reach the youth, as whatever the youth might be in the respective case, but if we interpret youth as future, younger people, they have to be quiet, to become quiet, in order to open up themselves, in order to achieve this transition you mentioned. How we shall achieve this, and now the advocatus ends, how we achieve this in a world driven by consumerism, driven by objects, and driven by hectics. How to make it?
You had a keyword, self-awareness. Mm-hmm. This is to get just out of an inner quiet. Sitting at the seaside, enjoying a sundown, and saying, okay, what's eternity? And please, if I can ask you, just to take things out of this kind of separation of time, like past, present, future, because if you are coming out of the self is always in itself, out of its own capacities, out of its universal space, inner space, it has a full capacity of eternity. It's not limited. It's not limited. It doesn't help, so to say. Yeah, but of course we are talking about future because we want to connect the outer space with the inner space and the inner freedom with the outer freedom. And it is, even in our discussion today, we come along this line. And what I think is important to provoke or to invite that the people stop to be in fear, to confront their self with their self, because the self is the only what they have in quotation marks. It means to be, and this to be means to realize about myself. Who am I, and what do I want to develop? Opening up my my inner space for creativity, for creative visions. This is important. It's not just a term to be creative. Creative, all people are creative, also in the outside world. I don't mean it, no. Just feel in yourself, what do you want? What are your wishes? What are your dreams? Dreaming again, contemplating about, but even then also reflecting about, also finding the one other reason and legitimation and transcended level even to expand. There is so much space to expand. It's wonderful, and we just neglect that systematically out of, like you said, driven by the small ego, the outside stuff, and the reality. I don't make it bad, I don't make it small. It's very huge, it's very fine on the one hand, but what we need, I think, is, and I would like to give you another keyword which is very important for me. We can open up, for example, via aesthetics.
This is interesting. Can you say a bit more about this connection to aesthetics?
Aesthetics is it's a kind of chiffre for the soul level, and the soul connects spirit and reality, your body, so to say, your bodily reality, and this kind of function is very easy to reach because you just need to sit down in your garden and, for example, to appreciate your neighborhood trees. That is a natural beauty. But the other way around, you can also put yourself in front of the Acropolis and asking yourself, how did they invent such a kind of proportional aesthetic, for example? You don't need to like it at least, but you can adore it, because whatever you see outside is just a resonance on your inside. And what you don't cover inside, or what you don't carry insidely, you cannot see outsidely. If you cannot love yourself, you cannot love your wife. And this is, I think, to recreate in a conscious process, to go via aesthetics. Aesthetics in a huge kind of a broader kind of understanding.
It's not.
It's awareness. Yeah. It's awareness regarding the niceness, the beauty on the one hand in the world, but it's opening up to your own soul, because then you have an inner space resonance, so to say, before you are going in any dependence in the outside world. And this is my appel, or my votum to go back to that kind of aesthetics. Take Schiller, the aesthetic letters. That's very nicely describing this kind of function. And it's an eternal, as long as we are human beings and allowing ourselves to be that, and especially to be humane, I think we come always back to that. It's an eternal realization, and I think our future will not be without, or we are very much in danger to receive, or to reach the future, I think. Even the process is starting with.
Let's go to the idea of the trilogy of the individual human, society, and states. I mean, in your view, what is the most significant essence and power facing the future design of society?
It's definitely the individual, yeah? And especially not the ego. The ego is just a resulting part of the self, and it's the individual self. The individual is the most powerful force, the most powerful energy, the most powerful reasoning to determine the world we are living in. And out of that you can create a society, and the society defines the state. What kind of state do you want to live in? You know, if the autonomy of subject, like Kant donated us, this kind of thought, if that's fulfilled, you have the categoric imperative fulfilled anyhow. If that's fulfilled, if that ever would be fulfilled, you never need a state, so to say. But as long as we are humane human beings on the one hand, on the other hand with our failings, as long as it's like that, we need a kind of coordination of power, we need a coordination of will, of individual inner will needs to be coordinated by the society, and the society takes a state in order to organize. We don't need a state to get new ideas, because a state's function isn't about ideas. That comes from inside, the individual self and its own determination.
Well, the function of the state, as we had it, is coordination, means organizing things and managing things.
Right.
Huh?
Yeah.
The point is, coming back to Grant, the point is how to achieve this transition to become aware, in the sense you described it, is the very first step for this transition. And this becoming aware is an individual issue. How to translate these individual issues into a social movement in pragmatic terms. A social movement means not ideology. A social movement means in the sense of a polis. The free citizens are deciding in what kind of state and status they want to live, in organizational terms. And how to come regarding the question about the trilogy, how to come from the individual awareness to the society and to the formal organization of that society to the state. If we see this trilogy as some kind of different forces interacting with each other.
Exactly. That's
how to make it.
That's dialogue. It's interaction. It's discourse.
Mm-hmm.
For what? Not at the end of the day, but even in between, we need a kind of resonance space. Mm-hmm. The inner space is the most important, because there's a determination, there's a vibration, the vision, the energy, or whatever you need. The real energy is only there. It's like you had a Big Bang, but the Big Bang had a predeterminative energy. And this energy we carry inside. And then to go out in order to, and it's a very nice process to create a resonance. Why do we sit in a cafe, and meeting people and having discussions just for nothing first, but at least finding out maybe there is a very interesting point and deepening on that and finding out what can we optimize. And that way our future starts to be, because it's dialogue. And this inner freedom meets the chances to implement in the outer freedom space and to create adequate resonance. The resonance is very important.
And this is the important point as regards the conveying of the individual inner freedom, premise it has been achieved, to what I characterized as what I call the social movement. Mm-hmm. It's not enough for a transition that I, the individual, am free alone. I need to translate it. I need to convince other individuals around me. And how to make it? Also in the end, we want to arrive at a kind of social organization in a positive sense, a kind of polis. Even if the social organizations is non-statal in the classical sense, and is, also with polis-like, is a smaller decentralized community, but we have to cooperate with other people to achieve this. We have to organize ourselves to make it real, and therefore to make the transition real. How to make it?
But isn't it also because you have the individual in combination with aesthetics, right? So therefore, this is an important aspect of that.
The individuals with what? I didn't understand acoustically.
The individual, like as we've been discussing, which seems to be a centerpiece of your belief, I mean, basically, there's an aesthetic base to that. I mean, there's a belief from your point of view of the importance of aesthetics relative to the individual. So therefore, like, I think, can we talk a little bit more about that just for a moment, just expand on that a little bit, maybe? The individual and aesthetics in today's society.
As Mr. Giemann also mentioned, it is the awareness, in the mutual process of dialogue, of deepening, issuing questions, of discussing positions, not only opinions. Opinions are very many opinions all day, but positions which can be discussed. Also, being provocative, being creative in approaching issues, or creatively findings to exchange about. The exchange is important stuff. And let me please correct it. It's not my belief about aesthetics, if I don't want to correct that way, but I'm not on the level of beliefs. It's a kind of realization if you ask yourself, what is the real missing? And I think the aesthetics as a door opener, as a gate opener for awareness, for also critical feelings, critical contemplation and meditation about opening up to reflection, gives me a profile, gives me an identity. And with this identity as an individual, having a kind of inner mind and especially an inner will, with this will going out and communicating about communication and reconnecting first with the inner self, and then to go out and reconnecting with the world again. And let me say it like that, I approach this kind of neo-freedom. What is a neo-freedom for me? Neo-freedom for me is a kind of equilibration process between the inner and the outer self, because at the end of the day it needs to be connected. The outer freedom only is senseless because it lost the will. The inner will only is also, anyhow, it's not totally senseless, it's nice to have, but it's not only about to have the inner will, it's to be. And to be means to have an inner will and to communicate in a peaceful way, trying to convince, trying to also to intellectually fight for to convince. And that is a very, very, there's a kind of process even in the aesthetics, so to say. And this I understand about aesthetics to drive a very clear and clarifying process to create resonance on not only my individual will, but on the different other wills. And then to conclude, and then to and also what I would like to add as an appel in this case, in this context, to be true to yourself. Be true to yourself and to your next, so to say. Work with a truth-finding process. Nobody, except of the absolute individual, only the absolute only exists in the individual, has an inner truth. But outside we don't have a truth. We have a truth-finding process. And this kind of resonantial process we need in order, that what you, Mr. Gehmann, asked some minutes before about to find a so-called polis. Then we have a polis, because it's reconnected. On the one hand, the inner self, and on the other hand, the inner self with the other inner self, so to say, and creating a common ground for that. And this common ground is, let me say it like that, I don't quite know what your definition of ideal space can be, but this is the ideal space, in my sense, in my definition. If you take your idea of an ideal space, communicating about in the outside world, in the getting a resonance and working in the outside reactions on that in order to idealize further, and then you get the polis in the ideal space. The ideal space is a space which outsidely creates the inside-driven will and ideas out of an inner space in the outer space.
Yeah. So basically, let's talk about the moment and where the momentum goes with this moment, and how we can define today's moment, where we are today, as we've expressed during the last half hour or so. And now we have to sort of figure out, is there a positive momentum in your point of view that we're going to, or is it something that we should fear what's coming in the future?
No. No, in the sense of your last point, don't have any fear about whatever. Why? Be yourself and analyze whatever you meet and react on that as far as you want, as far as you feel invited, because the outside world is a resonantial space on whatever, but it's not necessarily together with you or to combine or to you are not necessarily concerned by. Fear is no advisor, not a good advisor, as we know. It's today's, we work very much in politics, for example, with the fear stuff, but the fear isn't anyhow a good basis to develop whatever, so to say.
Yeah, I think I'm sort of coming from the point of view, the more, if I, sorry to interrupt you, it's not the fear, let's say, of you or I, but let's say the general public, the average person, the working person, the middle class, the lower class. It's a very difficult existence today. There is automatically fears. And to overcome those fears, something has to be done to sort of give them a positivity for the future. How do we get this positivity to the working class, to the middle class people, so that they have something that they believe they can live for?
It's a very complex question, needs a very rich answer on the one hand, but I try to keep it very short. If you try, since thousands of years, try to lead people by fear, projecting even metaphysical spaces like God, divine spaces, as a projective energy, not as a resonantial energy, but as an ego projected energy, in order to lead the people via their, so to say, pseudo-fulfilling egomanic projection. Then you have the fear, because the people take their self and perceive their self only as a physical being. But this is not enough, of course, as we now talked about. It's a metaphysical being. Of course, the middle-class worker, or whomever you take out of a more broader sense of society, they must not have the consciousnesses. But therefore we need also a neo-freed elite, so to say, in order to guide this process, in order to open up to the spaces of inner freedom and outer freedom, open up to the equilibration. And coming back to your question of moment, I connected this one time with this kind of moment of quiet, this inner quiet. Yeah? This inner quiet is important just to relax for a moment, without being anything like force, anything like pressure, anything like I have to do anything. Don't have to do anything. There is no must. There is nothing. Just to be yourself and to feel yourself, to start to feel yourself, even on an aesthetic level, and to resonate with a nice tree, to resonate with a nice also design object, maybe that, but I feel myself because I like it. The liking is the first step in a kind of opening up to myself, because I feel myself, you know. This is very important, and then that's not already the momentum, but out of feeling myself, I create the real meaningfulness and the consciousness about my being, and this is the basis for creating a momentum, because a momentum is a quality. The other processes before are just a kind of quantity, just uncritical, so to say. But then it gets to be critical. It needs reflection. It needs discourse, an inner discourse, in order to be decided or to be pre-decided or to generate wishes, to generate a will. And then to decide about to communicate with whomever, with good friends or whatever, then generating the policy we talked about. This is then the momentum coming out of the inner quiet. We learned in the Bible, I think, I don't know where it exactly is to read, the first was the word. No, the first is spirit, not the word. I, for example, try first to think and then to talk. And therefore, first there's thinking, reflecting, approaching issues, whatever, and then there is a word. And the word is that what's maybe to hear or not.
We've discussed a lot about individualism here, which is a very important aspect. In today's society, architecture, art, the visual, which brings sort of to people's minds sort of a peace of mind, if that can be said so, something to look at. I mean, how can we take art, architecture, and combine that with the individual, but also create what came out of Greece many years ago, the communal society, the grouping of people, the communication, the dialogue between people? Because if we go too far with individualism, aren't we losing the aspect of communication between people on a communal level then?
It's a very interesting question because it opens up to another kind of phenomenon between people, between human beings, which can be solved. I'm not talking about individualism and anyhow any legitimation of anarchy. And it's very easy to explain. We talked about inner freedom, outer freedom. The basic principle of freedom is its own immanential limitation. Freedom doesn't have to do with any limit in principle, but it's limited by itself. If you have the external freedom, it's not anymore perceivable. It's not anymore to describe. No, it always has its own structural, so to say, limitation by definition. So, and this is to take in the subject, which isn't identifiable with the object, has its own mind, has its own reflection, has its own understanding of its own freedom, and even being connected with the absolute and the transcendence. But the anyhow riper and developed subject knows always. In that moment, it goes from the self via the ego and the communicational level. It's always in the frame of an immanentially limited freedom, of course.
This is one point. The other point is coming back to Grant's point. How to translate it into a community? How to generate? You cannot make communities, no? Per decree. Communities are evolving, in particular with this inner freedom needed to make, in metaphorically, a real polis. Coming back to the real polis, coming back to Grant's point, how to make this step from the individual inner self, which is a strictly individual act by definition, to more than an individual. If you want to make a polis, we need more people. And we cannot we cannot convince, we cannot only convince. And then we would have, in the best case, I'm the advocatus diaboli again. In the best case, we will get a polis of 10 people if we only try to make it via conviction, or let's say 20 maximum. And out of these 20, let's say I'm the advocatus diaboli, the bad guy, I'm the pessimist. Out of these 20 people, minimum 10 do not understand what it's all about, which is half of 20. How to make a polis out of this? In your positive sense, in your positive direction. We spoke about directions.
I can give you back the question one-to-one. If you take your work, you're a kind of inspirator. You inspire. That's all what you can do. Because you want a total free subject vis-a-vis of you. You are a free subject, and what else to expect from the others? And be glad if it's a free subject, and not just playing like, doing like, having the power to convince of this and this and this. No, just I think we don't need to care about too much. You open up with your work, what you do, with your foundation, for example. It's that what's needed in the world. That's what needed between human beings, between organizations, between the societies, between also the states at least, That's needed just to inspire, nothing else. And trust the process. Trust yourself and trust the process. I only can appel that in that way. I cannot give you any, like in a book for cooking, like the recipe, do this and this and this.
No. So this is
be aware about the ingredients of your soup, but just inspiring. Whoever might feel this taste or this taste or this taste, it's another question. If, for example, take architecture, it's sometimes finding a no, it's sometimes finding a yes. Yes, okay, but it's an outer space, creating the resonance on an inner space. An inner space reacts freely. This is the wish. This is the way to go. And this is the future, in my sense, to have this equilibrating process. And equilibration is also including any communication we have. How, for example, did we meet? Out of seeing, hey, there is a guy who thinks about stuff, who is active on that stuff, who is organizing this and this and this. That way you organize the polis. The polis is a free process of not only like-minded people, but even people seeing, oh, that's interesting. Not only to learn about, maybe to optimize, maybe to enrich, maybe to correct here and there also. If it's convincing, why not? What we don't need is any enforcement. Enforcement, yes, of a good strength, of goodwill, yes. On the other hand, what we don't need is force. Force doesn't convince.
Well, this has been an interesting podcast, and we'd like to thank Michael Heynen and his Nomoi Institute, as he is the executive director. We also want to thank Ulrich Gehman and the Ideal Spaces Foundation. And we also want to thank our technical people, Sean. And hopefully we can meet again together and have another podcast on this, because we've opened up a lot of subjects, and hopefully we can expand on this. And I hope the audience sees that there's a lot of very interesting and positive points for the future of society. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gehman, Grant, Sean. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.